This is Focus with Jack Caudill.
Good evening, I'm Jack Caudill. Welcome to this month's edition of Focus. This month we're talking about medical marijuana here in South Dakota. 3 guests with us to talk about that. Kittrick Jeffried is here. He's the owner of Puffy's Dispensary, headquartered out of Rapid City. Emmett Reistroffer, he is the Chief Operating Officer of Genesis Farms. They have licenses across the state. And a patient advocate from Spearfish, Liz Tiger, is here as well. Little background on the third try. South Dakota voters said yes to medical marijuana back in November of 2020 with 70% of the vote. Amendment A, which would have legalized recreational marijuana, that passed with 54% of the vote, but that amendment later overturned by the court. Now the state has the South Dakota medical cannabis system up and running. Drawings have been held for licenses across the state. That leaves people just waiting for dispensaries to open around South Dakota. Kittrick, we're going to start to you. So where exactly do we sit in this process and timeline at this point?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Jack. Right now, currently, we are working diligently to get engineers and architects with our site maps to go for our construction workers to build these dispensaries out. There's a process that has to take place through Rapid City Community Development and going and obtaining a building permit and a certificate of occupancy, as well as all the stipulations that were put forward on all the licensees when they were granted their license. So currently right now we're going through those phases of the program and should be up and running by fall of this year.
How much more complicated is this than opening up a record store or a food store?
Wildly complicated. So a record store doesn't have to have security cameras on every single point of egress and ingress within the store, as well as point of sale systems and especially cannabis seed to sale tracking with the metric program that's being implemented. You don't have to track every record from the manufacturer all the way to the point to who it's sold to.
And Emmett Reistroffer, the COO of Genesis Farms, you have licenses across South Dakota. Where do you guys sit? Where are you in the process now of trying to get things up and running?
Well, thank you, Jack. So Genesis Farms started last summer. We are 100% locally owned and operated. Our headquarters is based in Box Elder, where we will grow, manufacture, package, and distribute our products out to about 14 dispensaries across the state. So I've been working my tail off for the last 6 months, not only building this business from the ground up, but simultaneously advocating for the recreational ballot initiative to move that forward, lobbying our state legislators, and communicating with state regulators. It's been an educational endeavor all around, educating friends, neighbors, the business community, the medical community, and patients who are right now attempting to get their cards, and that's starting to roll out. We do have some concerns, and we're watching closely to make sure the program rolls out and everyone who needs medical cannabis can get medical cannabis. So I'm doing my part as a businessman now and working as hard as I can. It's urgent, and I want to get this business up and running and get medicine to the people who need it most as soon as possible. I'm also aiming for some open dates this fall, and right now we're in the process of hiring and training and building out our locations, and we're just 6 or 7 months out from really bringing our products to market.
Now you mentioned 14 licenses across the state. Why headquarter it all in Box Elder? How did you come to that decision?
Well, first of all, Box Elder has been a great community, and as Kittrick and Liz know, community relations means everything with a brand new industry. A majority of South Dakotans voted for it, much like a majority of Americans support it, but there's still folks out there that have questions and concerns. So early on, I went to city, building those relations, and Box Elder looked like the best opportunity for us in South Dakota. The real estate was available, the infrastructure, the power, the water, those sort of things that you need to build one of these facilities. And we like its proximity to the Black Hills. Knowing South Dakota has 14 million tourists a year, we wanted to be as close to the action as we could on the west side of the state. But we'll distribute our products across the entire state. So whether that's Aberdeen, Pierre, Huron, Mitchell, or Sioux Falls, I look forward to getting that product on the shelf soon.
Now, Liz Tiger, you described yourself as a patient advocate. What do you mean by that?
Well, what I mean by that is people who have chronic illnesses and disabilities often don't have a voice. It's difficult for them to know how to, for instance, go to peer and give testimony to defend a law that's important to them, or even come and do something like this and come speak with you on your show to talk about issues and things in their lives. And so I actually took a training course that's offered here in South Dakota, Partners in Policy Making. I'm a year 29 graduate. We just had our year 30 celebration last weekend. And what they did was they taught me exactly how to use my voice to help amplify those voices which need it. So we help people understand what their rights are and how to ask for their needed supports. Now, medical cannabis falls right into this because for many people, medical cannabis is a needed support for them to get through their day and manage their conditions.
So what does this mean for patients, that this is getting closer to becoming a reality here in South Dakota?
Well, for a lot of people, it's a life-changing experience for them. Myself, I have 5 qualifying conditions under the medical cannabis law, and because I have an autoimmune disease that gets quite complicated, I can't take certain things that you normally would for pain, like ibuprofen is off the table for me. Tylenol is not a good option. So medical cannabis in its varying forms actually gives me the freedom and the ability to do the things I need to do in life, and other patients are in the same boat.
Now, we mentioned earlier this is the 3rd time that South Dakota voters voted on medical marijuana. It finally passed. What changed in the state during that time that made people finally say yes to it, do you think?
Well, all I can do is speak from my experience. And in 2010, I was out there getting petition signatures, sharing my family's story because I had a loved one that needed medical cannabis. And ironically, people told me in 2010, it'll be at least 10 years, and they were actually right. It was 10 years later in November of 2020 that South Dakotans approved it. I think the public perception has changed, and one of the main reasons why is because there's 36 states now, I believe. I can never keep track now. Most states have medical programs, and we're seeing it work, and the sky hasn't fallen. There's nothing to be afraid of. A lot of the propaganda from the drug war many decades ago is starting to fade, and people are starting to recognize prohibition has failed. We need models of regulation. We can tax this product. We can put it in legal storefronts, and they trust that model now, I believe. And I think I'm pretty optimistic about the vote coming up in November as well.
Now, Kittrick, you've been involved in the cannabis industry in both Colorado and Oregon where it was legal. What did you see change in attitudes here that you think finally pushed it through here?
Well, I think that as the nation grows, and no pun intended grows, but we have this ever-changing dynamic of how marijuana is perceived, and as Emmett had said, that is becoming more tolerable. You have people that can understand that it's not as harmful as they once thought, and that it actually helps these patients out. So within the changing temperature of South Dakota, I think it was a learning curve. I think as people got more educated, more states started legalizing, that helped open them up to that perceived stigma of cannabis.
Now, Liz, you work with patients, somebody that wants to get a card. We're talking about qualifying conditions. Mm-hmm. How does somebody get a card if they want a card? The system is up and running, but there are some challenges in there, it sounds like, as well.
There are some challenges. The very first thing that a patient is going to do and should do 100% of the time is check with their primary care physician. Work with the physician they're already working with. As we mentioned, there are challenges with some medical systems, and physicians aren't comfortable writing recommendations under the current rules, but your physician may be able to recommend you to somebody else who is comfortable and can write that recommendation for you. So nobody knows your medical history better than your primary care physician, ideally, and that's why you need to be able to work with your regular team on this.
So how do you find a doctor, though, that if your doctor says, no, we're not doing that, how do you find somebody?
It's tough. It's very tough to do that right now. A lot of it's being done by word of mouth. We have seen a couple of these pop-up clinics come up in Sioux Falls. I believe there's one in Rapid City that's coming up in the next few days as well. I don't have the information right off the top of my head, but it's available online for anyone who's looking for it. I've seen it on Facebook and several other places.
All right, we got to take a break. We'll continue our look at medical marijuana here in South Dakota when we continue with this month's edition of Focus. Welcome back to this month's edition of Focus. This month we're talking about medical marijuana here in South Dakota. Emmett Reistroffer is the COO of Genesis Farms. They have licenses across the state. We talked earlier about Amendment A overturned by the courts, and now there's a drive to get that recreational marijuana back on the ballot in November. What's going on with that? Where does that stand right now?
Well, Jack, quite frankly, the people won't give up. You know, we voted for this, a majority of South Dakotans. It's unfortunate what happened in the courts. I could blame our legislators, but right now I'm just looking forward. I'm doing everything I can, as are the other two folks on the show here today. Getting signatures right now at various places across the state. I'm confident that South Dakotans for Better Marijuana Laws, who I'm proud to support, will get this on the ballot. And I believe the facts and the truth will prevail, and a majority of South Dakotans, again, will support this ballot initiative. Now, there is one key difference, Jack, that I want to point out. Amendment A was a constitutional amendment. This year's proposal is just an initiated measure. So that's a different strategy, and I believe that that's a smart decision to make, and South Dakotans will likely pass that in November.
Now, Liz Tiger is a patient advocate. You mentioned you are heavily involved in that drive, that petition drive. What are you seeing from that in this part of the state out here?
I see a lot of interest in this part of the state to get this done. There's a lot of questions as to why should we do this again if our votes didn't matter last time? And the answer is always our votes always count, and we need to make sure that our voices are heard loud and clear over and over. But I know a lot of people are upset, and I think that is going to get more people to turn out this November to vote on this issue to make a statement. So I see a lot of support out here at the Black Hills.
And Kittrick Jeffried is the owner of Puffy's Dispensary here in Rapid City. From a business standpoint, what does that mean to get that passed as well? You would have the recreational added to it. What does that mean from a business side?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you look at the history of what other states have done in their transition from medical into the recreational market, all 18 states that currently have recreational marijuana have transitioned their medical marijuana dispensaries into that recreational market, and that would be something that we would love to come in and explore that option, typically separating the medical dispensary and the recreational dispensary by different counters or different desks. There are differences in that with purchase limits and things like that. But at the end of the day, it's the exact same product, and who better to do that than the already existing medical marijuana establishments?
Now, marijuana is still, regardless of what happens in South Dakota, still illegal federally. What kind of challenges does that make for a business, banking-wise, and all other kinds of things? How big of a challenge is that for you guys?
Oh man, there's so many challenges. First would be banking. That's at the forefront of everybody's mind. So within that corporate structure of the banking policy, from my limited understanding of how the banking industry works, is that a certain amount of a bank's portfolio may be allowed to invest in high-risk businesses where cannabis and medical cannabis would be deemed that high risk. We currently have a law on the books here in South Dakota that was passed in the 2021 legislative session that allows South Dakota banks to operate with cannabis businesses, but that also has its troubles in having to overturn decades of corporate bureaucracy that has actually prohibited the bank from allowing to engage with cannabis businesses. So as they work on these pilot programs, you'll see a lot more banks engage in cannabis businesses here in South Dakota, but currently most operators are looking to out-of-state existing banks in Colorado, California, Oregon, these places that already have those existing markets. But other problems, insurance. There's not too many underwriters that will look at a cannabis business and say that's something that we want to insure. That's a high-risk business that we could do COP coverage for or liability. So there are specific tailored businesses like insurance, CPA work, banking, that are all tailored specifically to the cannabis industry because of these federal regulations.
Emmett, how do you look at those federal challenges and that push that you see in Congress now to decriminalize marijuana federally?
Well, we worked through those challenges. Much like Kittrick said, we have no choice. And we early on teamed up with the leaders in the industry nationally, one of the best attorneys out of Colorado that's helped shape and influence some of the regulations, as well as a CPA firm. And it is an added cost to every business. That's unfortunately a barrier to entry for young entrepreneurs. And I've seen that happen over and over again. But for those of us who are lucky enough to have the resources and can build that type of operation to meet all those standards, we're proving how it can be done. Now, we have to lobby at all levels of government. That means Washington, D.C. too, even though it moves at snail's pace year after year. I'm getting more optimistic my gut would tell me any change in federal law would probably happen right before a midterm election or maybe the next presidential election. But I still believe how I understand the federal legislation is it doesn't force legalization on anyone. It still preserves states' rights for each state to make its decision on whether or not to end cannabis prohibition, but would open up things potentially like interstate commerce, access to banking, access to lending, all those different things that currently we face challenges with.
Now, with those federal laws, does that make it a challenge that everything has to originate here in South Dakota? You can't grow something in Nebraska and ship it up here and do it. How much of a challenge is that for you?
Well, as of right now, actually, I think it's been a fairly good thing. In light of prohibition, cannabis has evolved uniquely, different from any other industry. Our supply chain has to be 100% within our state borders. We cannot import or export any cannabis products. Hemp is a little bit different, but for anything with THC, we have more or less a cottage industry where we're growing it, we're packaging it, we're distributing it, but all within South Dakota's borders. And every other state operates the same way. I think it'll probably be that way for a while, but I'm sure in the future we'll see a new model come out where you can ship the product across state lines.
Now, Liz, going back to patients for a second, when you go and get your medical marijuana card, how does that differ from getting a prescription? You're technically not getting a prescription from the doctor. What are the differences and how does that work?
Well, the differences are that you're going to get a recommendation from your physician, and then you still have to fill out your patient portal through the South Dakota Department of Health. I don't know of any other therapeutic or medication or anything that you have to go directly to a department within your state government to get permission to go actually pick up and use. So that's your first difference. You have to register with the Department of Health. The other thing is, obviously, you're not going to go to a pharmacy to have this dispensed to you. You're going to go to a dispensary, or in some cases have your home cultivation products from that, materials from that. So those are some of the major differences. Another thing, and this goes into the federal barriers as well, insurance. A lot of patients, especially people who are chronically ill and people with disabilities, are going to be on Medicaid, Medicare, things like that. Your insurance is not going to be able to run these appointments, nor are they going to help pick up the cost of your product when you go to purchase it from the dispensary. So those are some of the major differences you're going to see. All
right, we got to take another break. We'll continue our look at medical marijuana here in South Dakota when we continue with this month's edition of Focus. I'm Jack Caudill. Welcome back to this month's edition of Focus, talking about medical marijuana here in South Dakota. Liz Tiger is a patient advocate from Spearfish. You've been involved in the Petition Drive and met a lot of people that are pushing to try to get this through. Who are these people? What kind of people are coming forward and moving forward with this?
It might surprise you to know that by and large we see a lot of seniors that are coming forward and they want to see this issue go forward. They want to see this legalized and back on the ballot. It matters to them. So.
Now, Emmett, how big do you see this business getting?
Well, quite big, in fact. According to my own analysis, it's 1% of the state GDP. So that's pretty significant. We're talking about $500 million a year. It could be far greater than that, too, when we think about the 14 million tourists coming into South Dakota. But what I look at is the averages across the nation, how many people consume cannabis, how much cannabis do they consume, and what's it going for? What are the prices? You add all that up, and we're looking at a $500 million industry, which is why I think the right decision for South Dakota is to regulate that, put a fair tax on it. We don't want to be overtaxed. It should be a fair tax that makes sense. And every South Dakotan can benefit from this industry, whether you use cannabis or not. As taxpayers, that's a lot of money that can go to paying our teachers better, paving our roads, et cetera.
Now, when you talk about that figure, are you talking about if recreational goes through as well, or is that strictly on the medical side?
No, by all means, that's including the full market. So that would be a recreational, every adult over 21, and the tourists coming into South Dakota. Right now, and I'm sure Kittrick may agree with me, it's not very profitable to do medical. We got into this as advocates first, and now as entrepreneurs. But we've got to get this to people who need it. That is what's most important. And if we're lucky enough, we get to turn this into a profitable business. But we won't see those profits until long into the future, and hopefully after we get the recreational ballot measure passed.
Now, Kittrick Jeffried is the owner of Puffy's Dispensary here in Rapid City. How much interest are you seeing from people that keep asking you, wondering what's going on and trying to get this thing going?
Oh man, I get phone calls every day about what's happening, where are you guys at with opening stores, how's cultivation and manufacturing going. The interest, it's a hot commodity. People are very interested to see where this business goes, and to Emmett's point, the profitability of it. Right now, we're looking at an IRS tax code. It's called IRS tax code 280E, and that prevents a business from being able to deduct their cost of goods. So in a normal business, like a radio record store, they would be able to deduct labor, the shelving, the racking, the security cameras. They would be able to deduct that from a normal business expense, where cannabis businesses aren't allowed to deduct any of that. So we're taxed at the full gross of what we sell in a given period. So people look at cannabis as money growing on trees. It's actually not that. It's not that profitable as people may think. But I think we have a bright future ahead of us. I think we've got a really good program set up right now, and the Department of Health did a really good job on promulgating these rules to make it fair for everybody, and I'm excited to be on board.
How about stigmas about marijuana? Are those still out there, and what do you guys do to try to counteract that?
Yeah, absolutely. The stigma is still out there. I mean, it's a matter of education, right? It's a matter of personal belief. Everyone's entitled to their own opinion, and they may view marijuana in the same way that they view alcohol. Maybe it's for them, maybe it's not for them, right? So I believe that stigma's there. I believe that it comes down to folks like us on this panel to continue to educate the public and our lawmakers, our city council members and county commissioners on what good policy is and what safe practices are.
Yeah, Emmett, you're going to get customers who know a ton about marijuana and customers who know nothing about it. What do you do for that group that has no idea?
It's actually one of my favorite parts of this job. When we get to open these stores, we'll have folks coming in who have been waiting and waiting and waiting to finally try cannabis because they weren't going to try it illegally. They wanted to do it legally. And I respect that. And now we need to educate those folks, and we need to welcome them. And there are so many different ways to consume cannabis now, whether that's an oil tincture where you can drop it under your tongue, or an edible like a gummy that has a nice flavor to it, so it's not, doesn't taste like a plant necessarily, but tastes good. And then there's vaporizers, and there's also capsules and mints, and we can get pretty much really creative with how we infuse products and bring new products to market, even beverages. So that's what we try to do when we bring all these products to the market, is allow everyone to find a product that works for them. Sometimes it's low THC, sometimes it's high THC, it's low CBD, high CBD, how you ingest it, that sort of thing. And we're happy to have those conversations with people. Of course, they should also talk to their physician, like Liz mentioned earlier. That's incredibly important. But there was an article that just came out recently where the medical community was recognizing there's such little to no risk with drug interactions with cannabis. So I believe it's very safe to use for a lot of seniors and folks with aches and pains, and really it's a wellness product that a lot of people can benefit from.
Liz, I got about 30 seconds left. What, as far as for patients who have no idea what they're doing, what would you say to them?
I think that for brand new patients that are looking to try this new avenue to alleviate their conditions or alleviate their symptoms, just start slow. When you find your dispensary, you're going to have bud tenders that know what they're talking about, that can help step you through the process. And just take it easy, work your way into it, see how it works for you. Try a variety of things. You've got products that you can ingest, like your gummies and beverages like Emmett was just speaking about. But we also have things like topicals, creams and gels that can go on your skin to help alleviate some joint pain and muscle pain and things of that nature. So really try to get familiar with what products are available and get an idea of what it is you're trying to alleviate.
All right, we are out of time. Kittrick Jeffried, Emmett Reistroffer, Liz Tiger, thank you for joining us. Appreciate it. Thank you for joining us for this month's edition of Focus. See you again the first Sunday night of next month. Good night.